Ever catch yourself in a moment that's so absurd you don't know whether to laugh or cry?
Oh, definitely.
That tangled up feeling, that's really the heart of what our listener sources are calling the human comedy.
Exactly. Yeah, we've really immersed ourselves in these excerpts from the human comedy and AI. And they define it as, well, the full sweep of human existence, right? Packed with joy, sorrow, and a good dose of bewildering absurdity.
Right.
And it's all driven by our constant efforts, to make things better.
To improve well-being.
And just stick around longer.
So our mission in this Deep Dives is to really unpack this multifaceted concept. We're pulling out the key insights to give you a clear understanding, a shortcut almost, to this fundamental aspect of being human without getting bogged down.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's begin by trying to pin down the essence of this human comedy.
Okay.
The initial reaction, maybe yours too, is that laugh or cry, duality.
Yeah, that hits home.
It's a universal touchstone, isn't it? This feeling that kind of fuels our desire to minimize suffering.
And maximize the good times, yeah.
And that feeling, it's echoed through, well, great literature.
Like Balzac, Honoré Balzac's La Comédie Humaine.
Exactly, that massive work. It aimed to capture the entirety of 19th century French society.
Wow.
His ambition, really, to catalog the full range of human experiences that set a powerful precedent.
For trying to depict the whole messy comedy of being alive.
Precisely. The key insight there is his attempt to show the interconnectedness,
Of individual lives within the bigger picture.
You're right, within that larger societal drama. While it was rooted in a specific time, Balzac was aiming for something broader.
The spectrum of human actions.
Yeah, that inevitably lead to both joy and sorrow.
Then you've got William Saroyan's The Human Comedy.
Which directly tackles that laugh or cry idea.
Especially against the backdrop of wartime America, right?
Exactly. His work really underscores humanity's capacity for hope, for empathy, even when things are incredibly tough.
So the core takeaway there is resilience.
Resilience of the human spirit, yeah. Finding joy despite suffering.
Right. Saroyan really emphasizes that ability to just keep going, to connect with each other.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this whole human comedy framework itself kind of arises from that need to cope with pain and keep some sense of well-being.
That's a good point. Now, if we look at this philosophically,
Right.
The human comedy contrasts with tragedy, particularly when you think about human agency.
Agency, how so?
Well, drawing from Aristotle's idea of praxis, that our freely chosen actions shape our lives.
Right.
The human comedy, unlike tragedy with its often predetermined fate, involves our choices.
As we strive for dignity, community.
And joy, yeah. Despite all the uncertainty, it's about making those choices even when, the path ahead isn't clear at all.
So it's not just passively observing life's absurdities.
No.
It's actively engaging with the challenges.
Exactly. And the very act of trying to define this human comedy that shows our human need to find meaning in our often contradictory existence.
Right. The naming itself is part of it.
Totally. And the comedy here isn't just about jokes, is it?
No, it's the whole human drama.
Full of ironies, absurdities. It's more like the classical sense of comedy.
A narrative that persists, adapts.
And ultimately avoids complete catastrophe. The drive to name it, that reflects our fundamental search for understanding in what often feels like a chaotic world.
Okay, let's dive deeper into that. The sources mention the absurd stage.
Yes. This highlights that inherent tension, doesn't it? Between our human yearning for meaning
and a universe that doesn't just hand it to us.
Exactly, a universe that seems indifferent. Now, it's really vital here to distinguish absurdism from nihilism.
Okay, what's the key difference?
Well, absurdism doesn't just say life is meaningless because there's no preordained purpose.
Right.
Instead, it acknowledges that lack of inherent meaning, but it still affirms the value of our human experience.
So we can still find value.
Yes, and crucially, our capacity to create our own meaning right here, right now.
So it's like creating our own music, even if there's no universal score to follow.
That's a great way to put it. Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, really explores this.
Sisyphus pushing the rock.
Forever. He defines the absurd as that fundamental clash, that conflict between our deep human need for reason
and the world's unreasonable silence.
Exactly. He portrays Sisyphus endlessly pushing that boulder uphill as the quintessential absurd hero.
But how is he a hero? It seems so pointless.
But Camus argues that even in this seemingly pointless struggle, Sisyphus can find meaning and even happiness.
Ow.
In his conscious revolt against the absurd, that famous line, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart."
Wow. So the key insight is finding value in the act of living, despite.
Despite the lack of inherent cosmic purpose, yeah.
That completely reframes it. It's not about the destination, the top of the hill.
It's the journey itself, the pushing.
So how does Camus suggest we respond to this absurdity then, if we accept it?
For Camus, the response is a conscious embrace of the absurd through three things: revolt, freedom, and passion.
Okay, break those down.
Revolt is this constant refusal to just accept the absurd condition, to keep pushing back. Freedom arises from recognizing we're not bound by pre-existing meaning.
Which allows for authentic choices.
Exactly. And passion involves living life intensely right here in the present.
So when you think about that desire to, feel good all the time.
Maybe it's not about constant pleasure, right?
Maybe it's more about finding deep satisfaction in actively engaging with life.
Even with its inherent absurdities. Yes.
That connects directly to existentialism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That idea that existence precedes essence.
Precisely. Existentialism builds right on this. It asserts that we're not born with some predetermined nature or purpose.
We exist first.
And then we define our essence, who we are, through our choices and actions.
Which grants us immense freedom.
But also profound responsibility for the values and meaning we create.
So even if the stage of the human comedy is absurd,
we as the actors have the agency to define our own roles. The core insight is our radical freedom and the weight of responsibility that comes with it.
Which brings us back to our listeners' initial curiosity. Even just questioning the human comedy
is an attempt to find clarity within this framework, yeah. An existential act in itself.
And those desires we talked about, alleviating suffering, prolonging life.
From an existential standpoint, those are perfectly natural responses.
To the precariousness of it all.
Exactly. To the absurd condition. They are ways we assert value, create comfort.
But there's a catch.
Well, thinkers like Sartre cautioned against what he called bad faith.
Bad faith?
Yeah, where we deny our freedom. Maybe by rigidly clinging to these pursuits, like just avoiding pain, without connecting them to a deeper self-chosen value system within the human comedy.
So it's not supposed to be a passive experience?
Definitely not. It's an active exploration of our freedom and the meaning we create for ourselves.
This is fascinating. So if life is this absurd drama, where does tragic comedy fit in? It sounds like the perfect genre to capture all this.
You've absolutely pinpointed a crucial aspect. Tragic comedy as a genre really mirrors the human comedy.
So?
By blending elements of tragedy and comedy, it avoids those neat resolutions you get in pure comedy.
And the inevitable downfall of pure tragedy.
Right. It reflects life's complexities much more realistically, where joy and sorrow are often tangled up together. The key insight is its realistic portrayal of life's inherent contradictions.
Our sources mention it often emerges during times of crisis. Why would that be?
That's revealing, isn't it? Tragic comedy often appears historically during periods of significant social or cultural upheaval.
When things feel unstable.
Exactly. When established meanings, the foundations people rely on, start to dissolve or crumble. When the lines blur between tragic fate and, just weird comedic coincidence.
Tragic comedy steps in.
Yes. It arises to capture that ambiguity. It's almost like a post-metaphysical drama, as the sources put it, suited for what they call an absurd universe.
Which suggests that maybe the listener's current interest, why you might be curious now,
could reflect a very contemporary search for meaning in uncertain times. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
And within these tragicomic narratives, humor serves as a really vital coping mechanism.
For characters facing tough or absurd situations.
Exactly. And the humor here isn't about minimizing suffering, not really.
What's it about then?
It's more about highlighting the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, our ability to find moments of lightness even in darkness.
Which connects directly back to relieving pain.
Absolutely. It's a tool for psychological survival, for adaptation. It goes way beyond just amusement.
So viewing the human comedy through this tragic comic lens means?
It means embracing that inherent ambiguity, finding strength not in denying suffering, but in integrating it with joy and the ongoing human endeavor, the struggle itself.
Okay, so we've kind of deconstructed what this human comedy is. Now let's look back. Where did it come from? The sources mention ancient echoes, rituals, early theater.
Indeed. You can see ancient rituals and the birth of theater as these really early human attempts to grapple with profound life experiences.
Like death, fate.
folly, the absurdities we encounter. Think about ancient Greek theater. It evolved from Dionysian rituals, right? With masks, choral performances. That shift itself signaled a move towards more abstract thought, more reflection on the human condition. The key insight is that these early forms were collective efforts to understand life's big questions.
And that's where we see the formal separation, or at least distinction between tragedy and comedy.
Pretty much, yeah. The laugh or cry in early drama.
Right.
Greek drama formalized tragedy, exploring suffering, aiming for that emotional release, catharsis.
In comedy, often using satire for social critique.
And typically ending in some kind of resolution, often marriage or reconciliation. Even the satyr plays, they provided comic relief after the intensity of the tragedies.
So it was a structured way to explore these things.
Yeah, it offered a public forum to explore societal values, the often turbulent relationship between humans and the divine or fate, all crucial elements of this unfolding human comedy.
The sources also mention satire, specifically as an early way of engaging with this. It goes way back, even Egypt.
It does. While the term satire itself is Latin, the use of humor to critique society is ancient.
Like the satire of the trades.
Exactly, from ancient Egypt, humorously arguing why being a scribe is the best job. Even Plato reportedly suggested reading Aristophanes' comedies.
To understand Athens.
Yeah, to understand Athenian society. These early forms show the human need not just to experience life's absurdities, but to critically engage with them.
Through humor and ridicule.
Right. It was a way for societies to collectively process things, and also to transmit cultural understanding and values.
So from these early dramatic and satirical forms, it seems the need to make sense of life's big, often inexplicable parts has always been there. It wasn't just felt, it was performed, discussed.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about the power of stories. How have narratives shaped our understanding of this human comedy?
Oh, storytelling is absolutely fundamental. Foundational, really.
More than just entertainment.
Way more. It predates writing, persists across all cultures. That alone tells you how crucial it is for human evolution, for societal function.
There's research suggesting an evolutionary advantage.
Yeah, some research suggests that skilled storytellers might have been seen as more desirable partners, maybe had more reproductive success in certain hunter-gatherer groups. It's fascinating.
Wow.
But beyond that, stories were just vital, transmitting survival knowledge.
Like don't eat those berries.
Exactly. Establishing social norms, fostering cooperation, our ability to think about the past and future, what psychologists call mental time travel. That's deeply linked to storytelling. It allows us to learn vicariously from others' experiences.
So am I asking about the origins of human comedy, or your interest in it?
It's a modern manifestation of this ancient human drive, yeah. To understand our existence through narrative.
So it's not just entertainment. It really is how we make sense of things.
Fundamentally, sociologically, we construct meaning through the stories that shape our lives.
Personal stories, family histories.
Cultural myths, historical accounts, all of it. Narrative sociology explores how these stories are created and how they, in turn, shape our social, cultural, political structures. Our behavior isn't formed in a vacuum.
It's influenced by cultural trends, values.
Spread through these narratives, exactly.
And these cultural narratives, they help us when things get tough, right? They build resilience.
Absolutely. Cultural narratives offer shared frameworks for understanding the world. They provide models for navigating hardship.
Like stories of people overcoming adversity.
Exactly. Think of stories of resilience passed down through generations. They offer examples of how others have faced tragicomic situations, providing both, practical advice sometimes, but also crucial psychological support.
So the human comedy isn't some fixed script we're all following.
Not at all. It's this evolving, co-created meta-narrative.
And our individual stories are like subplots within it.
That's a perfect way to think about it. And coping with life's harsh realities, that was likely a major selective pressure for developing storytelling in the first place.
Which means, if it's narratively constructed,
then consciously changing the stories we tell ourselves and each other could actually alter how we experience and navigate this human comedy.
That's a really powerful idea, that we have some agency in shaping the narrative.
We do.
So, alongside stories, philosophy and spirituality have also been trying to make sense of all this for ages. How have those inquiries shaped our understanding?
Yeah, philosophy and spirituality represent these enduring human efforts to understand the big questions, right? Suffering, happiness, justice, meaning.
The core themes.
Exactly. You have ancient Greek philosophers like Plato exploring justice and the ideal society.
Or Epicureanism, focusing on finding tranquility.
Right, through knowledge and limited desires. Much later, you get Descartes, his cogito, ergo sum.
I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, his emphasis on the individual mind really influenced existentialism's later focus on personal meaning-making.
And major religious traditions.
Buddhism, Christianity, they offer their own comprehensive frameworks for understanding suffering and the path to liberation or redemption. The key insight across all of this is that persistent human quest for meaning and a good life.
And even more contemporary thinkers like Hannah Arendt have weighed in.
Indeed. Arendt, in The Human Condition, offers a modern perspective. She looks at fundamental human activities, labor, work, action, and how things like modern alienation or the loss of political freedom impact our experience today.
So across all these diverse traditions, millennia apart,
there's this recurring preoccupation with the problem of suffering and the pursuit of a good life. It never goes away.
So the evolution of philosophical thought shows this shifting understanding of the human comedy, right, towards maybe its more absurd aspects.
It does seem that way. It reflects, I think, a growing awareness of its more absurd or tragicomic dimensions over time, and definitely a greater emphasis on the individual's role, our responsibility in finding or creating meaning.
And the sheer diversity of these inquiries.
It highlights that the human comedy isn't a puzzle with a single solution, is it? It's an ongoing dialogue about how to live.
Okay, so we've looked at the historical and philosophical angles. Now let's dive into the inner workings, the psychological, the biological dimensions of this human comedy. First up, the emotional palette. Laughter, tears, everything in between.
Yeah, our capacity for this wide range of emotions is absolutely central, and humor in particular plays such a complex role.
Psychology has theories about why we laugh, right?
Several. There's the superiority theory, laughing at others' misfortunes, basically.
Okay.
Relief theory laughter as a release of built-up nervous tension.
Makes sense.
But the most widely accepted now is probably incongruity theory. Yeah, the idea that humor arises from perceiving something unexpected or mismatched, followed by some kind of resolution or understanding of the mismatch. The key insight is just how multifaceted humor is.
So it's not just one single thing that makes us laugh.
Probably not. A single funny moment could involve elements of all these theories, you know?
And beyond just explaining laughter, humor is a powerful coping mechanism.
Hugely important. It can reduce stress and even perceived pain partly through endorphin release.
Ah, the body's natural opioids.
Exactly. It helps reframe situations, fosters resilience. That laugh component really helps us deal with the potential to cry.
Humor isn't always positive, is it? It can have a darker side.
Absolutely. Humor can be unhelpful if we use it just to avoid difficult emotions.
Or harmful if used to attack others, put them down.
Right. And then there's that phenomenon of laughing till we cry.
Yeah, what is that?
Psychologists call them dimorphous expressions, seemingly contradictory reactions to really intense emotions.
So why does it happen?
Well, there are theories. Maybe it's about emotional regulation. The crying helps calm down the intense positive emotion of the laughter. Or shared neural pathways in the brain for strong emotions. Even just physical pressure on the tear ducts from laughing hard.
That's wild.
But what's really interesting is that both laughing and crying release endorphins and can reduce stress hormones.
So physiologically, the laugh or cry duality is real.
It seems to be physiologically validated, yeah.
Yeah.
Suggests this duality is fundamental, maybe evolved. Understanding these mechanics can actually inform how we approach well-being.
That's fascinating. So these expressions are deeply ingrained. What about the biological and genetic threads of this human comedy? Where do they fit in?
Well, the human comedy isn't just cultural or psychological. It's deeply rooted in our biology and evolution.
The evolutionary psychology perspective.
Exactly. Basic emotions, fear, joy, sadness evolved because they helped our ancestors survive.
Right. Fear helps avoid danger. Joy reinforces beneficial things.
Precisely. And we also developed complex psychological adaptations, problem solving, communication, cooperation, our whole behavioral toolkit. The key insight is the evolutionary basis of our emotional and social behaviors.
The sources mention this defensive mimic theory of emotional expression. That sounds really intriguing.
It is, isn't it? This theory proposes that expressions like smiling,
which might have started as a submissive grimace.
Exactly. Or laughing, maybe from sounds made during play fighting.
Or crying as a response to a blow.
They evolved from exaggerated defensive reflexes. Initially just signaling an internal state, but then exaggerating them became advantageous for social signaling, for influencing others.
That's a really different way of thinking about a smile or a laugh. What about the evolutionary origins of humor itself? Why did that evolve?
Good question. Several hypotheses. Maybe it facilitated cooperation and bonding within groups.
Makes sense. Laughing together feels good.
It does. Some suggest humor, especially language-based humor, might have partially replaced physical social grooming, like primates do, as a way to reinforce social ties in larger groups.
Interesting.
It seems likely humor played a critical role in our social evolution. It helped us navigate complex social landscapes.
And when we face the challenges of this human comedy, we have our coping mechanisms. How have those evolved?
Well, our understanding of coping has evolved too. Early psychoanalytic ideas focused on unconscious defense mechanisms.
Like repression, denial.
Right. Contemporary theory, like Lazarus's transactional model, sees coping as more dynamic. It involves how we appraise stressful situations.
Do we see them as a threat or a challenge?
Exactly. And then our conscious and unconscious efforts to manage them, using problem-focused strategies or emotion-focused strategies. And generally, we tend to develop more adaptive strategies as we mature.
And genetics plays a role in how we experience all of this, right? Our emotional reactivity, our moods.
Absolutely. Our genes definitely influence things like how emotionally reactive we are, how well we regulate emotions, and our susceptibility to mood disorders.
Specific genes have been linked.
Yes. Genes like 5-HT-TLPR or COMT have been linked to variations in emotional processing and sensitivity. And mood disorders clearly have a significant genetic component, a heritability.
So our expressions, our feelings, our ways of coping.
They're rooted in these deeply conserved evolutionary adaptations, initially for survival, then refined for social communication.
Which creates that tension, doesn't it, between these evolved responses?
It's our conscious choice, our agency, that existential theme again. Understanding these biological roots can foster self-compassion, I think.
Yeah, knowing it's not all just conscious choice.
Right. But it also highlights where we might need to make a conscious effort to navigate the human comedy effectively.
Okay, so our biology and psychology set the stage. But how we actually perceive and interpret the events of this human comedy is also key, right? That's where cognitive biases come in.
Exactly. We don't experience the human comedy objectively. Our brains use cognitive biases, mental shortcuts. They're usually efficient, but they can distort our perception.
Like confirmation bias.
Classic example. We tend to seek out information that confirms what we already believe.
And ignore or dismiss stuff that contradicts it.
Right. Which can really skew our worldview, making us lean towards seeing things as either inherently tragic or overly optimistic, for example.
And there are a whole bunch of these biases, aren't there?
Oh, loads. Availability, heuristic judging based on what easily comes to mind. Anchoring bias, relying too heavily on the first piece of information. Gambler's fallacy, halo effect, optimistic overconfidence. Well, the list goes on.
So these aren't flaws exactly. They're just how our minds work.
Pretty much. They're inherent features of our cognitive architecture. And they contribute significantly to the unpredictability, the misunderstandings, the sheer messiness of the human comedy.
Because they shape our subjective experience.
Totally. They influence why people react so differently to the same joke, the same news event, the same personal setback. The key insight is that these biases inherently shape our subjective experience of it all.
So recognizing these biases is important, crucial even. How can we try to overcome them, or at least account for them?
Awareness is absolutely the first step. Just knowing they exist.
Okay.
Then actively seeking out diverse perspectives, people who think differently, engaging in critical thinking, questioning our own assumptions. Practicing mindfulness can help too, creating space between stimulus and reaction.
So we can have a clearer understanding of the human comedy and our own reactions to it.
That's the goal, to see things a bit more clearly.
Okay, we've explored the individual experience, the philosophy, psychology, biology, biases. Now let's zoom out. Let's look at the social fabric. How does this human comedy play out in our collective lives and our interactions?
The human comedy is deeply, fundamentally social. Humor and laughter, for instance, are incredibly powerful social lubricants.
Bonding agents.
Absolutely. They trigger positive feelings, strengthen relationships, buffer against stress. And laughing with others is much more potent than laughing alone.
Right.
And a lot of our social laughter isn't just spontaneous. It's often quite deliberate, intentional communication.
So it's more than just a reaction, it's a tool.
Exactly. Humor acts as a kind of social probe sometimes.
Testing boundaries.
Yeah, seeing what's acceptable, you float a joke, See how it lands. If it bombs, you can retreat with "just kidding."
The just kidding defense.
A classic. Humor also plays a big role in group dynamics, establishing identity, defining who's in and who's out.
Negotiating hierarchies, maybe?
Definitely. Think about joking relationships in some cultures or just simple in-jokes within a group.
So our evolutionary need for social bonds.
Likely selected for these humorous capacities, yeah. They facilitated cooperation, smoothed social interactions.
But humor's ambiguity can also cause problems.
For sure. Misunderstandings, offense. It's a double-edged sword.
And there's a much darker side to this social human comedy, isn't there? Cruelty, dehumanization.
Sadly, yes. We have to look at that too. Cruelty often stems from a fundamental lack of empathy.
Which should be overridden by things like anger.
Or diminished through desensitization, exposure to violence. And then you have conditions like psychopathy, where empathy might be structurally impaired.
And dehumanization plays a key role.
A huge role. Perceiving others, or groups of others, as lacking essential human qualities, seeing them as animals or objects or disease.
It weakens our natural moral restraints against harming them.
Precisely. Think of enemy images in wartime propaganda or the effects of de-individuation in mobs. History is tragically full of examples where dehumanization paved the way for atrocities.
And then there's Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil. That's incredibly chilling.
It really is. Observing Adolf Eichmann's trial, she argued that immense evil didn't necessarily require monstrous intent. It could stem from sheer thoughtlessness.
Thoughtlessness.
Yeah, an inability to think from the perspective of others, a kind of disengagement, focusing on career advancement within a system, following orders without critical reflection.
So ordinary people
Can participate in monstrous cruelty through a lack of critical thinking and empathy, especially within bureaucratic or ideological contexts.
That suggests empathy and cruelty are like two sides of the human potential coin.
They really are, and the tools of the human comedy narratives, social norms, even humor can be manipulated for dehumanizing ends. Addressing cruelty means actively fostering empathy and dismantling those harmful systems and narratives.
Which brings us squarely to the ethical quandaries within the human comedy. It's not always lighthearted fun, and humor itself isn't neutral territory.
Absolutely not. The ethics of humor and comedy are increasingly under scrutiny. We have to examine intent, meaning, language, identity, impact.
The potential for othering people.
Exactly. Harmful or maladaptive humor, like aggressive humor used to disparage others, or excessive self-defeating humor,
Can have negative psychological impacts.
yes, and they're sometimes linked to negative personality traits. And using humor just to avoid dealing with problems isn't healthy either.
What about satire?
Yeah.
Use humor to critique society, right?
Right.
That seems positive.
It often is. Think of Swift, Dickens, using humor for social critique and reform. But satire is complex.
How so?
It can be misinterpreted, targets can feel unfairly attacked, it might not reach the intended audience, or it might just preach to the choir. It walks a very fine ethical tightrope between provocation and causing real harm.
So there's this constant tension. Freedom of expression.
Versus the responsibility to avoid causing harm, reinforcing prejudice, or dehumanizing people. These are huge debates right now.
And harmful humor often reveals
A lack of empathy, usually. Ethical humor, on the other hand, tends to foster connection and understanding. Cultivating ethical discernment and empathy is key to navigating this.
And all of this, the humor, the ethics, the coping, plays out differently across cultures, doesn't it? What's considered funny or appropriate varies wildly.
Hugely. While the capacity for these experiences, laughter, sorrow, seeking meaning, seems universal, the expression is heavily shaped by cultural norms.
Like British irony versus American slapstick.
That's one example, yeah. Humor styles, what's taboo, what's appropriate, it varies significantly. And cultural narratives provide those shared frameworks we talked about.
For understanding and responding to life events.
Exactly. Different cultures have distinct narratives about the human comedy itself, its purpose, how to navigate it, what constitutes a good life.
Even how we manage emotions.
Definitely. Cultural display rules dictate how, when, and whether certain emotions should be expressed. Some cultures might emphasize suppression for group harmony, others expression for individual authenticity.
So it's like a universal human experience.
Performed in diverse cultural dialects, you could say. Cross-cultural misunderstandings can sometimes be seen as comedic errors in the grand play. But despite the variations, the underlying functions and fundamental experiences seem remarkably transcultural, suggesting a shared deep structure.
This has been a fascinating exploration of the human side. Now let's shift gears. Let's turn to artificial intelligence and the human comedy. This feels like a whole new act beginning. How does AI even begin to understand something so nuanced, so human?
Well, AI's understanding is fundamentally different from ours. It's primarily data-driven and analytical.
So can it get humor?
It's getting better, but it's challenging. AI can often handle structured humor, like puns, reasonably well because it can analyze wordplay and patterns.
The nuance, context, satire.
That's where it really struggles. Understanding subtle context, cultural references, sarcasm, irony, the emotional weight that requires a kind of embodied, lived experience AI lacks. Sentiment analysis tools try, but they often miss sarcasm or irony.
So it can recognize patterns associated with emotions, but it doesn't feel them.
Precisely. Emotion AI, or affective computing, analyzes facial expressions, voice tone, even physiological signals or text patterns to infer emotional states.
Useful for customer service or mental health monitoring, maybe?
Potentially, yes. But it's pattern recognition, not subjective feeling. And detecting sarcasm and irony reliably is still a major hurdle, often needing multimodal approaches, analyzing text, tone, maybe even facial cues together.
And defining a concept as complex as the human comedy. Can AI do that?
Current AI, even sophisticated large language models, can synthesize information about it from the vast amounts of text they're trained on. They can generate coherent definitions and discussions based on human writing.
But it's derivative.
Exactly. It's pattern matching and recombination, not deep original understanding grounded in experience. It struggles with profound nuance and context. Its gaze is analytical, an outsider's view.
An outsider's view. That's interesting. But could that outsider's view actually help us navigate the human comedy? Could AI be a catalyst for well-being?
There's definite potential there, yeah. AI is already being explored and used in mental health care.
How so?
For things like early detection of potential issues based on language patterns, delivering forms of cognitive behavioral therapy via chatbots, personalizing treatment suggestions, even guiding mindfulness exercises, it can improve accessibility.
And specifically related to the laugh or cry aspect, can AI help with humor as coping?
There are interesting developments, for instance, the Self-Initiated Humor Protocol, or SIHP.
SIHP.
Yeah, it's being developed to be delivered by AI chatbots, or even in VR environments. The aim is to teach people how to use non-hostile laughter and find humor in everyday situations as a coping strategy.
So directly addressing the listener's interest in AI improving the human comedy.
Exactly. Pilot studies are showing some promise in improving mood and coping skills. AI could also potentially promote empathy.
How can AI promote empathy if it doesn't feel it?
By simulating cognitive empathy, understanding someone else's likely emotional state based on data and context, AI tools could monitor communication sentiment, maybe coach people on more empathetic responses in customer service, or even personal interactions.
But with limitation.
Big limitations and risks of over-reliance or misinterpretation, absolutely. But the potential is there for AI to act as a kind of personalized coach or assistant for emotional regulation, coping, and communication.
What about in creative expression? Can AI help us create the human comedy, not just analyze or cope with it?
It's already starting to. AI can be a useful assistant for comedy writers, brainstorming ideas, generating puns, mimicking styles.
But the human touch is still needed.
Crucial for refinement, for that spark of genuine wit or insight. AI is also changing internet humor, with AI meme generators and algorithms spotting trends, leading to more personalized, rapid-fire online humor.
So a future of human-AI collaboration.
Seems likely. Deeper partnerships enhancing artistic expression, though there are challenges algorithmic bias creeping into creative outputs, intellectual property rights.
So AI is moving towards co-creation and hyper-personalization.
Potentially, yeah. Leading to new forms, faster evolution of humor. But human authorship remains vital for resonance and depth, I think. There's a risk of homogenization or just superficiality if we rely too heavily on the algorithms.
This is all fascinating. What about the really big questions? Life, death, meaning, destiny. Can AI engage with those aspects of the human comedy?
Well, AI, especially LLMs, can certainly generate text about these questions. They can synthesize philosophical arguments, religious perspectives, existential reflections from their training data.
But it's simulation, right? Not understanding.
Exactly. It lacks subjective experience, consciousness, genuine belief, or doubt. And there are ethical implications, transparency about AI limitations, potential biases in its synthesized views, the impact on users seeking answers.
And AI related to death and grief. those grief bots.
Yeah, AI chatbots designed to simulate the personality of someone who has died based on their digital footprint.
That sounds unsettling.
It raises huge questions. Potential for comfort or connection for some, maybe, but also serious psychological concerns about hindering the natural grief process, ethical issues around dignity, data ownership, potential distress, commercialization.
Wow. And AI's unpredictability. Does that make us think about fate and free will?
It seems to. AI, even though human-created, can exhibit emergent behaviors we didn't explicitly program. It can feel like a modern technological form of fate. It forces us to re-examine agency, responsibility, the line between creator intent and autonomous action.
What about understanding life and death itself? A philosopher like Heidegger.
Right. Heidegger argued that authentic human existence involves confronting our own mortality, our being towards death. AI, lacking organic mortality, self-awareness, or finitude in the human sense, fundamentally lacks this dimension. It can't have that kind of ontological depth.
So AI's engagement here really just reflects our anxieties and questions back at us.
Largely, yes. Though things like grief bots might represent a genuine shift in how some people engage with death and memory. But fundamentally, AI's emergence is prompting us to re-examine these core human themes in the presence of a new kind of non-human intelligence.
Which all leads, inevitably, to some pretty significant ethical imperatives for developing and deploying AI within this human domain.
Absolutely critical. We need robust ethical frameworks.
Like for ethical humor creation by AI.
Yes. How do we prevent AI from generating harmful, biased, or offensive humor? It's hard, given its limitations in understanding nuance. And human perception of AI humor is biased, too.
And algorithmic bias in general.
Huge issue. Training data reflects societal biases, so AI outputs can perpetuate stereotypes or unfairness. We need diverse data, debiasing techniques, ongoing audits.
Transparency and accountability are key, too.
Users need to understand how AI reaches conclusions, especially sensitive ones. There needs to be clear accountability when AI causes harm, and meaningful human oversight and control.
And the risk of manipulation, especially with emotion AI.
Big concern. Using AI to detect and exploit emotional states for commercial or political gain. Plus, the risk of over-reliance on AI for emotional support, potentially diminishing genuine human connection.
So the overall approach needs to be
Proactive, human-centric ethics, prioritizing well-being, augmentation rather than replacement, equity, privacy. The human comedy, with all its nuances and emotional stakes, is actually a really challenging, crucial test case for AI ethics. We need maybe a specific branch of algorithmic ethics tailored to human socio-emotional experience, always acknowledging AI's fundamental lack of lived experience or qualia.
This has been an incredible, really comprehensive deep dive. So bringing it all together now, reflecting on everything, is life itself the ultimate human comedy?
It's a profound philosophical question, isn't it? But yeah, existence certainly resonates with that tragicomic blend, joy and sorrow, meaning and absurdity, striving and futility, choice and chance. They're all woven together.
Like Camus's absurd stage.
Exactly. And tragicomedy feels like a fitting response, embracing the contradictions. You could bring in perspectives from existential nihilism or Nietzschean tragic realism, too.
We're the actors, the audience.
And the interpreters, yeah. Co-creating this ongoing performance. It's improvisational. And maybe the meaning is generated through the process of living, the struggle itself. Accepting life as tragicomic might actually foster resilience, focusing us on the value of the process, not just some final outcome.
And alongside all this rational analysis we've done, there's that gut feeling, isn't there? Intuition. How does that play a role in understanding this?
Oh, intuition is crucial. Think about humor. You don't analyze a joke to find it funny, you just get it instantly. That's intuition.
And laughter itself is often instinctive.
Right. The human comedy involves so many emotional nuances, subtleties between people that often elude purely logical analysis. Intuition, which is deeply linked to empathy and lived experience, often gives us deeper insights.
Like rapid holistic processing.
Kind of like Daniel Kahneman's fast thinking, yeah? Processing all that social and emotional data instantly. Maybe we have an innate predisposition to engage with the human comedy. Empathy, humor, storytelling are part of our evolved human nature. Cultivating intuition alongside critical thinking seems essential. AI's lack of it really highlights its importance.
It really feels like this human comedy is something we fundamentally need. Why? Why do we laugh, cry, and constantly seek meaning?
Its sheer pervasiveness suggests it meets a fundamental human need, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The physiological, psychological, social benefits of humor and laughter, endorphins, stress reduction, bonding, that explains why we need the lighter aspects.
And the cry aspect, the sorrow, the struggle.
That's crucial too. Emotional release, signaling need for social support, finding meaning through suffering, making sense of loss.
So the need stems from
Our conscious, social, meaning-seeking nature, basically. Trying to navigate a complex, often challenging, sometimes absurd world. We need both the laughter and the sorrow, and we desperately need the narratives, the stories to make sense of it all. Understanding this better, as you're doing, benefits anyone seeking to live more consciously and compassionately. It leads to that better logic, maybe.
Our listener specifically asked about belief systems and this idea of observation after death. How do those fit into the human comedy framework?
Belief systems, religious, spiritual, even secular ones, provide crucial frameworks for interpreting the human comedy, especially the tough parts like suffering and mortality.
They offer solace. Purpose?
Often, yes. They can provide comfort and a sense of order in what might otherwise feel like Chemist's absurd universe. Beliefs can profoundly transform how suffering is perceived and experienced.
And the question about AI and better logic for life is all there is, versus some kind of post-mortem observation.
Well, the materialistic or standard scientific view is that consciousness is tied to brain function and ceases at death. Life is all there is in that sense.
But that's a philosophical stance, not empirical proof of non-existence after death.
Exactly. Many people and traditions hold strong beliefs in an afterlife, reincarnation, or other forms of continuity. AI could potentially present these diverse perspectives, analyze their logical consistency, facilitate existential reflection, explore the implications of different beliefs.
But it can't prove or disprove them.
No. These are ultimately matters of faith or philosophical conviction. That need to observation, as the listener put it, might reflect the deep human desire for our lives to matter, to have lasting significance, to be remembered.
Which connects to rituals, memorials, maybe even those grief bots.
Possibly, yeah. Individuals and cultures find their own logic, their own narratives for living with mortality.
And why don't we formally teach kids about this human comedy? It seems so central.
Well, elements are taught, just often implicitly. Through storytelling, history, literature, the arts, humanities, social-emotional learning programs, family and community life.
But not as a specific subject, usually.
Right. Reasons for not formalizing it might include its immense complexity and subjectivity, its deeply personal and existential nature, the curriculum focus often being on measurable skills, the difficulty of assessment, and maybe the potential for indoctrination if one specific view was pushed.
So maybe there's an argument for more explicit engagement.
Some argue for it, yeah. Teaching the ethics of comedy, philosophy for children programs that tackle big questions, and AI could potentially play a role here too. Personalized learning modules, Socratic dialogues, simulated ethical scenarios, explaining cognitive biases, offering diverse cultural perspectives on these themes.
But
Ultimately, the human comedy is probably best learned or explored as an ongoing process of inquiry, supported by human culture, connection, reflection. It's already deeply embedded in the process of learning to be human.
You know, reflecting on all this, it strikes me again just how physical this whole human comedy is. Laughter, crying, they're such embodied experiences.
Oh, absolutely. It's profoundly physical. Laughter isn't just a sound. It involves changes in breathing, oxygen intake, muscle contractions, endorphin release, modulation of the stress response, improved circulation. Gelotology, the study of laughter, looks at all this.
And crying, too.
Crying is a complex physical process. Emotional tears even have a different chemical composition than reflex tears, potentially linked to emotional release. The body's stress response, fight or flight, is constantly activated by life's challenges, and coping mechanisms have physical correlates.
And those dimorphous expressions, laughing till you cry.
Prime examples of the body's deep involvement. Even existential angst can manifest physically. Understanding the human comedy absolutely requires acknowledging its embodied nature. AI, lacking that embodiment, can only analyze it externally.
And finally, there's that constant interplay, that tension between freedom and belief in the human comedy. Destiny versus free will.
A classic philosophical battleground. Existentialism heavily emphasizes freedom. Existence precedes essence, the burden of choice, the resulting angst.
While belief in destiny or fate
Can provide comfort, a sense of order, relieve the burden of responsibility, perhaps.
and AI weirdly acts as a mirror here.
In a way, yeah, it's a human creation, yet its behavior can be unpredictable, almost like a technological fate we've unleashed. Working with LLMs can prompt reflections on agency within complex systems.
So the choice of belief
Remains deeply personal. It shapes how we navigate the human comedy. AI could model scenarios based on different beliefs, analyze narratives of fate or free will, facilitate self-reflection, but it can't give the answer. The freedom to believe itself is part of the comedy.
Our listener also expressed a hope maybe that AI could somehow improve or mitigate the harsher aspects of the human comedy, ease life. Is that possible? That's the potential role there.
There's definitely potential for AI to help us navigate it better, perhaps improve our capacity to cope.
By enhancing well-being.
Yes, through mental health support. Tools like that humor protocol, SAHP we mentioned, maybe even developing cognitive empathy skills even if the AI itself lacks true empathy.
And fostering better logic.
Potentially, by helping us recognize and combat cognitive biases, providing access to diverse information, perhaps helping us understand and process difficult concepts like death and grief in new ways.
And enhancing creative expression.
Through collaboration and personalization, yeah. But the ethical considerations we discussed are paramount.
Avoiding harm, ensuring privacy, preventing manipulation.
Augmenting human connection, not replacing it. Addressing bias constantly. And we need to be realistic. The goal shouldn't be to eliminate suffering or negative emotions entirely, to just feel good all the time.
The full spectrum is important.
The full spectrum is part of the human experience, part of the human comedy. Mitigation and improvement might look like promoting AI literacy, developing strong ethical guidelines, fostering human-AI collaboration wisely, investing in research on both capabilities and risks, and crucially, cultivating our own human critical thinking and emotional intelligence alongside the tech.
So AI can be a powerful tool.
To augment our human capacities for navigating the human comedy, absolutely. But wisdom, empathy, genuine understanding, those remain profoundly human. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the human comedy, looking through the lens of these insightful sources, you're just struck again by its immense complexity, aren't you? Its multifaceted nature.
It truly is. It brings us right back to that initial sense, that feeling of life is this incredible, often bewildering, messy blend of laughter and tears. Hopefully, this whole exploration has provided you, our listener, with a valuable, insightful perspective on these deep ideas.
And maybe, just maybe, it leaves you contemplating this thought. As artificial intelligence becomes more deeply integrated into our lives, how will it not only observe, but also inevitably influence the ongoing evolution of this human comedy? And what will our individual roles be in shaping that next act, that unfolding narrative?
That's a really powerful thought to end on. We definitely encourage you to keep reflecting on these ideas, mulling them over, and maybe consider how your own unique experiences, your own story, fit into this grand, ongoing, sometimes absurd, often beautiful narrative of what it means to be human.
This is DigitView.